back. Professor Bamberger is here. Professor, welcome to Timeline.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Professor, according to recent Pew Research Center survey, we have the number 70% of Hungarians see Islam in a negative light. I think the whole thing is growing in Europe as well. So is Islamophobia a problem right now, in European Union especially?
Well, in my view, it definitely is. What is the average Hungarian's experience with living Muslims? Allow me to say, as an outsider, as a German, just looking in on things, the average Hungarian probably has never met a living Muslim in his life. So, in my view, this is the result of a totally irresponsible, politically irresponsible campaign of brainwashing, not to speak of brain poisoning. I'm not, as you might, or as one might get the impression, I'm not a naive, sort of blue-eyed denizen of the ivory tower as an academic, denying that there are problems. I mean, human life is not imaginable without problems. And but I think the problems get magnified out of all proportion in these very short-sighted interest of a certain group of politicians whose major concern is the preservation of their own power.
And if Fidesz, for example, here in Hungary, they say that the whole propaganda, as you call it, that it's actually not a ban on Islam, let's say, but it's a ban on Islamization.
Well, if you ask me as a Western European, I don't want to live in one of the countries as a citizen of one of these countries with a Muslim majority population. But that is an entirely different question. The question we are faced with in Europe is to preserve the internal peace of people of different backgrounds living together, and also to preserve, of course, what I would consider the indispensable foundation of the European Union, namely a certain normative system, which is embodied, for instance, in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which is embodied, as far as I can tell, in the German Constitution. After the totally sort of unspeakable experience of Nazism in Germany, the German Constitution was formulated in a very strongly in a very pronouncedly liberal way. I use the word liberal because to me this is not a word of abuse, but it's the foundation of a democratic system, in the sense of a multi-party, of a pluralistic system, in which the human rights of every person living under the legal system or the constitutional system of a country so constituted is entitled to.
But how about the west of Europe, let's say? 2 years ago, when the migration wave, let's say, here in Europe was the biggest, many Western European leaders, let's say, especially Mrs. Merkel, she was really criticizing, let's say, the statements that were made by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. But now, let's say 2 years later, the rhetoric, especially of, let's say, the Austrian Chancellor, Mr. Kurz, it's more or less the same like Mr. Orban's 2 years ago. So what changed in these 2 years? Because the rhetorics are more or less the same right now.
I mean, this is in a way a certain irony, because after all, the stream of refugees coming from the Near Eastern countries has receded tremendously in the last 3 years. I mean, the wave, the tidal wave was the highest in 2015, and it has consistently decreased since then. So, so there is really no objective explanation or objective reason of why this propaganda campaign that started in Hungary and then has. Maybe it didn't start in Hungary, but it was very loud in Hungary and still is very loud in Hungary, is also heard in other countries like Austria, and I mean it's everywhere. But of course, it's in no proportion to the actual problems. I'm not saying there are no problems. There are challenges that have to be met. They have to be met by finances and they have to be met by personnel.
Can you comment on the statement by Mr. Orban, who said that migrants, that it's a German problem? It's not a European problem.
Well, if it's a German problem, then what's all the noise about in Hungary?
Well,
even this present government in Hungary accepted 1,300 refugees, which was I guess more than they would have had to accept under this sort of distribution scheme, which figures so prominently in Orban's rhetoric.
But where does this fear? It comes from propaganda. But what are the reasons for this propaganda? These guys, Orban, let's say. Poland, Czech Republic. What's the reason for the anti-Islamic propaganda, as you call it?
One of the facts that nobody can deny, of course, is that the refugees from Arab countries or from Muslim majority countries, and they do come from a culturally different background. But of course, then the sort of traditional sedentary population here in Europe. But of course. If you look at Europe, I mean, Europe may be an ideal on the one hand. On the other hand, of course, it's also a collection of very disparate, national states, which all have their different cultural backgrounds and social backgrounds. And of course, this is identity politics, but identities change. Identities are not set in stone. They are malleable. They are fluid. They are flexible, plastic, one might say. They can be formed and they can be changed. And if we look at them at the United States of America, for instance, which is of course the sort of primal, country of immigration. I mean, there you have, you also have problems. I'm not denying that there are grave problems in the United States too. But of course, you have people coming together from a tremendous variety of backgrounds and still, managing by and large to live in peace with each other and to sort of adapt and adopt to an American way of life. Why shouldn't the same be possible in Europe? I mean, I was very much in favor of Mrs. Merkel in 2015 when she said we cannot turn these people back, On the other hand, politically speaking, it was not too smart because it came overnight. It was really one of the rare expressions of emotions on Mrs. Merkel's part. Normally, she is not very open about emotions. And I think her emotions were right at the time. Politically speaking, it was not too smart because the many other countries in the European Union felt that they were, sort of ridden over steamrolled in a way by Mrs. Merkel. That was not her intention, I think. And of course, internally, in terms of domestic politics in Germany, she should have said at the same time, she should have said, yes, I know it's a challenge. We have to set ourselves to it. We have to exert the best of our potential in order to manage to meet this challenge. She didn't really say that much on that. There was a tremendous groundswell of support from civil society in Germany. But on the other hand, you do need, as a politician, to win support.
So in short, you think that her heart was in the right place, but that maybe she could approach the whole issue maybe a bit smarter, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, of course, she even admitted herself at some point, and of course, it's a patent fact that Europe ignored not only her or not only German politicians, but everybody in Europe. Not everybody, but most politicians in the European Union ignored the Syrian crisis And of course, the Syrian crisis is only one crisis of many in the Middle East, or of several in the Middle East. They all ignored it too long, because after all, this wave of refugees from Syria and other countries that didn't build up overnight. It was it was coming, and one could see it coming.
You said that there are a couple of main problems with Islam, let's call it like that, in Europe right now. Can you tell us the biggest problems that we need to approach as Europeans right now?
I think we have to have a weapons mix, as it is called in in defense policies. We need a multi-pronged approach. We need to, on the one hand, we have to preserve our own values, liberal democracy, regardless of what Hungarian and other politicians say. We have to preserve these values. We have to propagate these values. But on the other hand, we also have to be realistic. We have to help the immigrants with language courses, with proper schooling, with professional training, with all these, all these aspects. On the other hand, we also have to make clear we have to have a functioning police, we have to have a functioning judicial system. That is, if somebody has committed a crime, court proceedings and punishment, if there has to be punishment, have to follow sort of in short order.
Let's stick with Germany. Is integration a problem there? Do people who come from abroad, do they have troubles integrating themselves in German society?
Let's face it. There is the old American saying, dog bites man is no news. Man bites dog is news. Which means, of course, we read in the papers or we see on TV or wherever, or on the internet or in the so-called social media, we only hear or we only perceive crisis symptoms. We don't see the sort of normal everyday working. As long as there's no crisis, we don't hear about it. Now I'm not saying that there shouldn't be more done. For instance, in big cities like Berlin or Cologne or I don't know where, that there couldn't and shouldn't be more done in order to integrate or whatever, in order to help. Let's face it, it's these refugees. The vast majority of them, they come they come traumatized very often. You have to help them to adjust to life in an environment which to them is totally alien at first. And of course they also have preconceived notions about Europe, about Western society. And I'm not saying that their notions are correct. They are very often the victims of propaganda and so on, and of course also inherited prejudice and so on and so forth. So again, you need a multi-pronged approach, but I am not seeing the German state collapsing under God knows what.
But do you think that
immigrant-induced crisis?
But is the support of German people is it towards Mrs. Merkel's politics, let's say, with the migrants in the country, is it becoming less and less?
Yeah, it has decreased noticeably, which again is very often. I mean, voters' decisions or party preferences are very often the result of emotions. They are not always the result of a cool political analysis or even a cool assessment of what are my own interests. What are my interests as a Hungarian worker? To get a proper wage, to have good health, insurance and a functioning health system, to have good schools for my children, to have affordable housing, etc., etc. Now, all of these fields of politics are totally unrelated to whatever immigration.
Are you worried about the whole situation? I mean, let's say the propaganda is more or less winning. I mean, right-wing politicians are winning everywhere in Europe. Even Miss Merkel had problems after the elections.
Yeah, she had problems, but not so much because of the right-wing vote. I mean, the right-wing vote, of course, exists, and now we have this very ugly and criminal party there in the parliament. But you know, let's face it, traditionally, even long before the current wave of immigration from the Middle East, political scientists have diagnosed that there is a certain percentage of voters who are susceptible to authoritarian propaganda. And traditionally, this percentage has been about 15%. You know, as long as it stays there, it's manageable. The challenge is for the democratic parties not to try to, you know, sort of slide in the direction of these extremists. And in Germany, the problem of forming a coalition was caused by the FDP, by the so-called FDP, who are not free Democrats, you know, free democratic parties. In my view, they are not at all liberal. They are Manchester capitalists, and they also try to, you know, engage in whatever anti-European propaganda.
But if we go back to Hungary
Yes.
and to Fidesz as well, so what Mr. Orban is saying, that they can't say that this politics, which you call yourself as well anti-liberal and anti-Islamic as well, that's not the politics of Fidesz, but that's the politics of Hungarian people. Last elections, it was 70%, I think. And in the program, I mean, here in Budapest, on billboards, we had the picture of immigrants, of the wave at the border, let's say, and we had the sign "Stop." Yes. And apparently it was really effective with the Hungarian people who voted for Fidesz.
Well, let's face it, look at the media landscape in Hungary. Look at what Fidesz has done to the media in Hungary. Well, it's not Fidesz, it's Orban. I mean, as a German, as a non-Hungarian, I guess I have to remain tactful, even though I find it very hard to remain tactful in this context. I mean, it's in my view, it's politically criminal. It's brainwashing. It's an appeal to the basest instincts of people. And let's face it, we are all human. We are all, you know, at times susceptible to base instincts, as I just call them. It's not my word, after all. It's a common coinage. And as I say, where are all these waves of these hundreds of thousands of waves of immigrants in Hungary? There are no such immigrants in Hungary. They wouldn't stay in Hungary. They would go on to Germany.
They're saying they're not here because we stopped them. We stopped them with the walls, with the ban, to call it like that as well.
I mean, I'm not, I'm not saying there are no problems. Not only Germany, but the entire European Union and the entire international community of states, of course, has to do something about trying to solve these crises in the Middle East. And after they have been ignored for so long. And of course, the crises in the Middle East have a lot of outside actors. You know, you have Russia, which is also a criminal political actor on the international stage, and domestically as well, if you ask me, and even if you don't ask me. And you have Saudi Arabia, and you have Iran, and you have America, the United States, and you have Israel. I mean, you have a host of actors who all have very short-sighted political interests. I mean, de Gaulle, you know, if you remember de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle, the past French president, he used to say, states don't have friends, they have interests. Now, there is nothing wrong in having interests. It's how you define your interests. What are the interests of the German people? To live in a peaceful Europe, to live in a peaceful world, because you cannot insulate Europe from the world, and to live in peace with their neighbors, you know, and to have a functioning administration, etc., all of this. You know, those are the interests, and how to best realize those interests, how to best ensure that those interests are met. That's the challenge. And that goes far beyond the short-sighted interests of politicians, of corrupt, criminal politicians like you have in the administration here now.
And if we stick with Middle East, what do you think about Mr. Trump's policy towards Syria? Is it better than Obama's? But let's say he's standing against Russia, let's say, in Syria.
Yeah, but again, he has no consistent policy. I mean, Trump is a cartoon figure, unfortunately in very bad taste, and unfortunately he's there. And I mean, we can wish him away, but he won't go away on account of our wishes. So we have to, we have to deal with him or his administration somehow. But his whatever he said about the Middle East is of no value. I mean, the Middle East, of course, is an intractable problem, because there is nobody of any influence. I mean, no political actor of any influence and goodwill at the same time.
So is there a solution, actually? Can we feel a solution?
We won't see it soon. I mean, of course, there would be possible solutions. I mean, I think, realistically speaking, a cooling down of the present situation would already be some progress. I think we cannot expect a sort of perfect peace overnight. But a sort of cooling down and a sort of, at the time of the Cold War, before Gorbachev in the Soviet Union, there was this, you had to coexist somehow, and you had to be sure that there was no war, that there was no armed conflict, because there were nuclear weapons on both sides, and of course you knew that that was a no-go area. So you had to sort of cool off. You had to come to a sort of peaceful coexistence, it was called, And if something like that were achieved in the Middle East, that would already be a tremendous progress. It wouldn't mean peace, but it would mean breathing space.
But who's the bad guy, let's say, in Syria right now? Can we point our fingers towards the bad guy right now? You said Russia, let's say, their politics towards Syria is bad. But with the other countries, with France, Germany, with Western countries, let's say, is their politics good, or is it better right now than a few years ago?
As far as I can tell, Germany doesn't have any concrete idea or any formulated policy towards Syria, but the European Union, I mean, the Germany would probably most advantageously act through the European Union, but of course the European Union isn't a powerful actor on the Syrian stage, and you have Russia and Iran on the side of Assad, and Assad, of course, is a murderer. I mean, he has been a murderer for a long time. And of course, the Syrian system is also ultra corrupt. I mean, that was probably one of the reasons why he didn't engage in reforms. And on the other side, you have a hodgepodge of more or less radical Islamists. I mean, there is not much to choose between, But again, anything that would save civilian life in Syria would be progress over the situation as it is now.
Is there a need of reformation in Islam today?
Yes. If you ask me as a person, I would say I would answer with a definite yes. I mean, you said in your moderation at the beginning, in the introduction, you said you would ask whether Islam was in desperate need of reformation. I mean, I wouldn't put it that way, but I would say yes, there is definitely. But of course, you see, there is definitely a need for reformation. I mean, I see a need for reformation also in Christian churches or in Judaism or look at Hinduism. I mean, awful, what you have there in India nowadays, and in Japan. I mean, all religions need reformation in the sense that they need to come to terms with a world which is largely determined by science. And of course, science doesn't just mean natural science, it doesn't just mean astrophysics and Big Bang theories. I mean, that's harmless. You can easily, reconcile that with religious beliefs. It also covers the human sciences, for instance, psychology, political science, psychology. The so-called biological sciences, theories of, Catcher Darwin, or the modern, theories of of evolution. You know, I mean, there are so many fields where religions, which all, you know, not all, but most of them developed in centuries long before the modern, you know, scientific revolutions, have to come to terms. They have to adapt. They have to adapt and adapt to this changing and fundamentally changed view of the world. And as I say, science doesn't just mean astrophysics or geology or evolutionary theory or, you know, paleoanthropology, etc., etc. It also means social science. It means the insight into the into human behavior, into also the genealogy of human ethics or ethical systems, social systems. And that doesn't mean that there is not good and evil, or that there is not right or wrong. Yes, of course there is, you know, but it frequently is defined in ways which traditional religions have no idea of. And this need for reform, of course, it's only Muslims who can reform Islam. It's not me, you know, or any other, you know, outsider who could reform Islam. It's Muslims who have to reform Islam. And of course, I'm sitting here at the sandbox, and I can draw up a strategy that doesn't mean anything, you know. And it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be sort of consistent. It doesn't have to be an overarching theory to begin with. It can be piecemeal, you know, and inconsistent, and so on and so forth. And of course it covers a wide territory. It covers you know, relations between the sexes, you know, gender roles. It covers the attitude to violence, you know, but of course that doesn't pertain to Islam only. If you look at Christian denominations, you sometimes have just as dire a need for reformation, and human beings have to reform themselves constantly. I have to reform myself constantly.
I think all of us, right?
Yes. They were portrayed as the work of the devil, you know, so to speak, so an alternative approach to human rights from within a religious system would then be to claim that you know, human rights, modern human rights theory, this is nothing new. We have all had it in our religion, you know, forever and ever. And of course, there is this attitude among Muslims too, not among all of them. I mean, there have been some very serious and you know, serious thinkers on human rights theory in Islam who have tried to formulate human rights theory in Islamic terms, because I mean, this is definitely a challenge, and this is definitely a way to also a way to reconcile these various you know, traditions that in Christianity you also have had it. You have had theologians who said, yes, modern human rights theory has its roots in Christianity, such and such and such, and largely, of course, or it is the picture is more complicated than that, because there may be in Islam too, you know, all human beings were created by God. You have something analogous in Islam, and so there is a basis. There are sort of starting points or bridgeheads from which. But on the other hand, all theologians or religious thinkers have to, I think, conclude that they have to They have to open themselves up. They have to rethink their own tradition in terms of, that is my serious conviction, you know. I mean, of course, there are other people who may think, oh, human rights is all balderdash, you know. And there are some pronouncements by Iranian mullahs, you know, after Khomeini to that effect, you know, oh, human rights, this is all Western, you know, work of the Satan, and so on and so forth, you know. But Iran signed the international law, you know, for instance, the UN conventions on human rights. So this is the basis on which you can hold Iran, for instance, to implementing these laws. And you know, there was in Iran this very courageous lady, Shirin Ebadi, who has since had to leave Iran because her life was threatened there, who has also written about this, you know, about reconciling, quote unquote, Islam and human rights. But there are others too. There were others, and not only Iranians, but also others. I mean, it needs serious work, serious intellectual work.
Let's say that Christianity, it had its renaissance a couple of times in history. So how long will we have to wait? I mean, you don't have to give us the right number, but how long will we wait for the renaissance in Islam?
There is no really pluralistic political system in any country with a Muslim majority at present. If, I don't know, with the possible exception of Tunisia. Now, Tunisia is too small. Tunisia is too small. You see, and even in Tunisia, you have severe problems. You know, in Tunisia, you have had attacks on tourists. You have, you have Islamist, not only propaganda, but also, aggressive, violent campaigns. And in even if Tunisia succeeds as a pluralistic political system, as a secular democracy, Tunisia is too small to exert an influence on more than 1 billion Muslims in the world these days, you know. And now, of course, political systems are not; they don't rest only on religious values. There is always, other, power mechanics involved. In Turkey, for instance, Turkey at the moment presents a pretty dismal picture. But in Ankara, at the University of Ankara, you had a school of theologians who were very reform-minded for a while. I don't know what they are doing now, but in past decades, you had really, bold thinkers, rethinkers of Islam in theological terms, and they were teaching and working at Ankara University. In an Arab country, that would be unthinkable. You know, and sometimes changes do occur overnight, as it were. Look at Gorbachev. Who would have thought that Gorbachev would appear? Somebody like Gorbachev. Now, of course, if you look at Russia today,